Thanks so much. So let's say that InfoSec doesn't work out for you, and you decide to take a physical security gig, right? That sounds fun. We all want to do that. Your first job is you have to secure this big, ominous building downtown. Typical security thing, run in, do an assessment, figure out what's wrong, fix that, and then move forward to reduce risk over time. What's nice, though, is you're walking into an environment where most of the main entrances and exits are all documented. Well, I mean, like documented in the spreadsheet, so, really, really well documented. And, it's curated and updated by an intern. It's not like their only job, but, like budgets and schedules and stuff. Here's the problem, though. The employees who work in this building are able to add entrances and exit at will, as much as they want. Now, they have to ask for your approval, but that's not always possible. I mean, we know how work evolves. We need to, provide for a little bit extra functionality, maybe evolve the office layout to accommodate some customer requests, things like that. For instance, there's a room in the building that holds all of our customer payment information, so credit cards, account numbers, other PII, and that's, of course, locked to prevent unauthorized access. But actually, we had to put our overflow swag into that room. So, if sales is trying to close a deal, they want to sweeten that with some swag, and you're not in to let them in, we might lose that deal, and of course, that's unacceptable. So sales put in another door that's unlocked, but it's really tiny. It's only big enough for someone to reach their arm in and grab a t-shirt or a mug or something. And all the sensitive stuff, that's across the room. You good with that? Oh, by the way, your employees are installing, on average, about 60 new doors a day. And not all of them are like obvious doors. Some of them are very big, some small, some don't even look like doors. One guy just punched a hole in the wall. So how are you feeling about this? Do you think that you're going to be able to locate and document all of the doors that your employees have added over time and then keep up with this very fast clip of people adding these doors? All of this sounds absurd, right? This would never actually fly in a commercial environment. Hopefully you get where I'm going with this. This is the reality that we face in security and IT when it comes to understanding what technology is being introduced to our environments, especially now that the predominant form factor of software is a SaaS application. Cloud app, web app, I'm old, whatever. And for the longest time, us in security and IT, I think we actually thought we had it under control. But that was pre-ubiquitous internet, before smartphones, the dinosaur age. So the entire message of this talk is that we have a big problem with managing this technology in our environments that is evolving and getting worse every single day. However, our approach to solving this problem is not evolving. It's the same approach that we've used since my early days in IT. So here's what I want to talk about today. We'll give you some stats about sprawl, get everyone nice and scared. We'll talk about different approaches to manage sprawl. We'll talk about how the adoption of technology has changed over time. We'll look at what adoption looks like today. We'll discuss some of the various ways that SaaS inherently introduces risk. I'll share with you some of the lessons that I've learned. Maybe that's helpful, maybe it's not. And then I'll end with how I recommend to mitigate or not mitigate this risk. But first, let's play two truths and a lie. Everyone familiar with this game, hopefully? Okay, I'm gonna pop up three things. One of them's a lie, you can tell me which one, okay? So number one, the vast majority of IT and security teams have a pretty good idea what their users are doing. Okay, we'll see. Number two, today it is fairly easy to produce an accurate picture of your attack surface. Any of my homeboys, homegirls from Sevco in the room? That was for you. I used to tour with the Blue Man Group. Any guesses? Okay, I'm just messing with you. They're all lies. I did actually audition for the Blue Man Group, but that's another story for another time. This was all just a ruse, a setup for me to argue that due to what I just stated, this rapid adoption of technology, and this, the fact that most organizations are not keeping up with this adoption, you actually have no idea what your users are doing. and you can't produce an accurate picture of what your attack surface looks like. And while this isn't really the point of this talk, I do believe that this perfect storm that we're in of not knowing what's going on and not being able to keep up with this change, this actually makes it a lot harder for us to defend against, more motivated state-sponsored threat actors. So let's take a look at some actual real stats to drive this point home. So in 2018, Gartner predicted that 1/3 of all successful cyber attacks will be on data stored in shadow IT infrastructure. Well, in 2021, studies showed that they might be right. More than 50% of technology we're seeing, or technology budgets, are sitting outside of IT. Well, just tell them to stop buying stuff, right? In 2023, a study showed that 74% of employees, almost 3/4, said that they would be willing to bypass your cybersecurity guidance if it helped them or their team achieve a business goal. And then building up to the stat that 98% of cloud services are adopted without any IT oversight. So if we go by the stat of, on average, 60 people are introducing applications every single day, there are 59 if you know of one, there are 59 that you don't. And then I thought I'd include the fact that on average, a company wastes about $135,000 a year on unnecessary software licenses. So not only is this sprawl presenting a cybersecurity risk, it's presenting a financial risk as well. Why am I mentioning this? Well, because the average IT salary in the United States is $90,000. I'm sorry, it's being really distracting. Can you guys? Thanks. The average IT salary in the United States is $90,000. So if the average organization could get control of this sprawl, you could afford, just from this waste alone, you could afford maybe 1 or 2 full-time employees to get to all those nice-to-have projects like EDR and data loss prevention and privileged access management. Just for funsies, I asked ChatGPT to come up with some other ways that a corporation could spend $135,000. A couple of the highlights include gold-plated staplers, because normal staplers don't really sell the company's commitment to opulence. You could have zero gravity meetings. Rent the Vomit Comet, that plane that simulates zero gravity, to have some out-of-the-world strategy sessions. You can hire a fortune teller. This is one of my favorites. Have them help predict market trends using tarot cards, crystal balls, stuff like that. Or probably the most realistic, an office moat for the executive floor, because security is important, so why not a moat with alligators? Yes, I'm being silly, but the point of all this is that each one of these ridiculous suggestions actually makes way more sense to me than what we're actually doing, which is essentially throwing money out of a window. But now that I think about it, actually throwing dollar bills out of a high-rise in Chicago or something, it'd be way more entertaining than knowing that we're willingly wasting money on this software. So let's take a poll. How many of you here have shadow IT? Okay, trick question, y'all do. How many of you think that you actually have technology sprawl solved? Any brave souls? I didn't plan this, okay? And I'm not surprised if anyone wants to volunteer their approach to this. I'd be more than happy to entertain it, okay? Probably not, and that's good, because that is probably the mentality you need to approach this problem with. Because really, there are only 3 major kind of high-level thoughts or approaches to solve for this. And every single one of them are fraught with issues. So you could ignore this problem, and really that's kind of what we did for the longest time, because SaaS apps weren't even really on our radar, and even if they were, we didn't have, well, we called them web apps back then, but we didn't have an easy way to understand what apps were being used, how they were being used. I was still very junior at the time, but I would hear my leadership say things like, web application risk is not a part of our risk calculation because there's no effective way to quantify the risk. And I was just sitting there going, what? That sounds like the rando corporate speak generator. I can tell you from experience, though, this is not a viable approach, because you will get owned via one of these apps. It's a matter of when, not if. And when you do, you're going to spend a ridiculous amount of time trying to figure out what's going on, and then an even more ridiculous amount of time trying to figure out an ad hoc response plan. And I know this because I've done it. I have lived it. It has happened to me. So do not ignore this problem. It won't end well. You could enable this rapid, accelerative adoption. This is by far the most difficult approach, but in my opinion, it's going to produce the best results for your organization. Why is that? Well, because enabling that encourages innovation. It allows your employees to produce whatever you produce, for Kate and her chinchilla rescue, like get more chinchillas out on the street. Because you're getting a quicker time to value, getting the tools that they feel are going to be able to do their job faster to them quicker. I mean, I hear it all the time. You turn a week's worth of work into a couple of hours with a $100 a month app. Like, that's the way that we would like to do business, but of course, keeping up with that is the challenge. Another tangential side effect of this is that your employees are going to feel empowered. They're going to feel like they're part of the conversation and therefore happier. I know that's not our job, is to make our employees happy, but here's the deal. When they do feel empowered and they feel like they're part of the conversation, there's a high likelihood that they're actually going to adhere to that policy that you set out. There's a high likelihood that they're going to adhere to other policies that you're laying out as well. Did I mention that this is really, really difficult, though? I mean, actually keeping up with this. So we'll talk later about different approaches to how you can do this. And last, but certainly least, you could just lock everything down. I think this is the approach that we've been taking for a lot of years. On the surface, this seems like the most secure option. It may just stymie a little innovation, right? Not that big of a deal. But it is a big deal. Much like a bloomin' onion from my favorite exotic Australian restaurant, there are layers to this big deal. So we'll start at the defender's dilemma. Everyone here familiar with the defender's dilemma? Okay. Instead of you versus 1,000 attackers, though, which you kind of want to extend your attack chain and have them give up and go away, it's you versus thousands of your users, probably highly privileged users that in theory you want them to be successful in what they're doing, because if they're successful, they produce for the company stays afloat, you still have a job, yada yada. So it's not the same as defending against attackers where you're kind of hoping that they get frustrated and give up. So let's look at this from a practical standpoint. You're going to block everything. How has that worked out for us in the past? Not very well. How will you make sure that no one's adopting tech without your knowledge? Are you going to look at the network? What if they're not on the network? Are you going to lock your environment down? Well, just hop on guest Wi-Fi. You don't have that? Go to a coffee shop, pull up a hotspot, go to a personal device. I mean, endpoint control, same thing. I'm just going to pull out another device to address the SaaS app because I love the way that my CEO looks at this. Laptops today are like remote controls. You could throw your laptop in a lake and be up and running in an hour. You couldn't do that 10 years ago. So, it's not a question of controlling the devices anymore. And also, related to blocking, getting in the way of finance and maybe muscling accounts payable to let you know before someone expenses their AWS bill. I did that. That was a way to stop the bleeding, but by that point, the damage has already been done. This is months after whatever you're trying to stop from transpiring. So the point of all this is, from a practical standpoint, these blocking methods that we're trying to employ are too little and too late. You're never going to see the full scope of the use. You're never going to see the full scope of the permissions assigned to that use for sure. But even if you did, intervening after the fact does nothing to stop file share access, code repo or artifact access, use or theft of your credentials, having employees create infrastructure that can act as initial access points. Blocking just doesn't work. But even from a political standpoint, this isn't a viable path. Let's say you're blocking stuff and it's you've got some success from it. I can't speak for all organizations, but I can tell you in my experience, when it was Garrett's multi-factor authentication policy against a sales leader trying to get a deal closed at the end of the quarter, or it was Garrett's remote access policy against the engineering leader who was trying to get a feature in to win a deal at the end of the quarter, I never won. So again, just blocking may net you some positive results earlier on, but it's just not a tenable path in the long run. But really, blocking is actually much worse than all of that. Real quick, any parents in the room? Okay, scratch that. How many of you have been children before? That's all of you. What is the one thing that a parent can do or say to a child that will ensure that they will do the thing? Tell them not to, right? So here's the deal. If you think that all of us are anything other than just larger versions of children, I have some shocking information. We did a behavioral study with Duke University where users were taken through the following scenario. You need to access a file from a partner outside of your organization to complete an important task. Your partner then sends you a secure email link from an online file sharing app, DocuBox. It's not real, don't go there. And then you click on the link on the email to access the file. They were then randomly assigned an intervention condition, you can see up there, blocking, punitive, or a security nudge. And then afterwards, they were asked questions about their perception. How did they feel about this? What were their emotions? What were they likely to do next after this intervention? The first condition was meant to simulate being blocked from just signing up for an app. So no explanation given, just you can't visit this site on a big red page, kind of like a DNS filter or something like that. The second condition simulated receiving a notification from security that this activity was identified and noted, and you're violating the company's acceptable use policy, your account was suspended automatically, and you should be ashamed of yourself. Well, it didn't actually say you should be ashamed of yourself, but the intent was a punitive one. I mean, let you know you're in violation of a policy. In fact, they end it with, you're so bad at this, you need extra training. So this was not meant to be a pleasant experience. The third condition was a moderately friendly message that said, hey, we noticed that you're using this app. It's not something that we've seen before. Can you help us understand why you chose to introduce this technology? Our results were conclusive. It should be to no one's surprise that the more reasonable the participants felt about that intervention, the more likely they were to comply with that, any kind of policy or direction. And conversely, the more negatively the participants felt about the intervention, the less likely they were to comply. And furthermore, 67% would look for a workaround if access were blocked. We didn't even ask them. They just say, oh yeah, I would definitely find a way around that. And that shouldn't surprise you because the stat I had up earlier showed that almost 3/4 of the respondents said that they had no problem circumventing your controls if they felt it was going to help them get to their business objective. So let's talk about how we used to adopt technology. So remember me saying, back when I started in IT, we thought we had it all under control. Well, I mean, yeah, because we kind of did. I mean, we controlled pretty much everything. If you think back, in the dinosaur age. You want a web server to host video for an event? Well, that either meant that I was, spinning up a VM or buying you an actual server and racking it myself. You want a software license? Well, I'm likely going into the admin portal and granting you a license key or buying the software and installing it myself. Security software, forget it. That was always an appliance back there because the only thing we could do is tap into the network. You want a TV? That was us too. So the point is, if technology was introduced, we knew about it because IT was the one that was actually having to introduce this. As time went on, as technology became a little bit easier for end users to adopt, we did see cloistered pockets of groups of power users in organizations that were adopting and managing their own technology, but it was still pretty few and far between. Fast forward to today, where SaaS is the predominant form factor for software, and it's almost entirely flipped on its head. And as my super scary stat showed earlier, almost all cloud technology is adopted outside of your purview. So what does this technology adoption look like today? Well, as we've discussed, it's mostly decentralized at this point. You may still have a concept of a central control where the app is purchased by IT, but it's still quickly handed off to someone else's problem. Think about like a DevOps team rolling out a new build automation tool, or marketing setting up a new customer contact solution. IT is not going to be managing that solution anymore. Back in the day, we would absolutely still retain admin rights. The vast majority of organizations, though, they do have their users adopting and selecting this technology. In fact, there's a number of software vendors, maybe some who are out in that hall, that count on that behavior. And they even adopt that as part of their sales strategy. It even has a fancy name. It's called product-led growth, or PLG. And that's, hoping that we get people we get people using the software in pockets and then contact IT and say, hey, you got 10 people in your organization using whatever. You want to buy this? If you buy this, it comes with single sign-on, stuff like that. So the point is that everyone's aware of this adoption. It's not going away. So what we see in the normal model today is user will find what they want to try. They will evaluate the solution themselves, which usually not in a test environment, because who has a test environment these days? Which, as an aside, is also very troubling, because let's say they look at this and they say, okay, well, this app I want to integrate with this other application or this database or this file share or whatever. It doesn't house any sensitive data, so I probably don't need any security controls. But then, of course, we look at that as like, well, this might be a viable or resellable initial access point. But anyway, that's tangent. That's our problem, not theirs. Back to our user. If they decide that they want to purchase and officially use this technology, only then will they seek approval from IT. But as we've discussed, it's way too late at this point. The app is already integrated with your business practices, storing and sharing of company data, and team members already become aware and start using it. So if you come in heavy-handed at this point, you look like an asshole. You come in and say, oh, I'm going to block you at this stage. It's actually even worse, and that's going to drive your employees probably underground use. They're going to get disgruntled and ultimately try to circumvent your controls anyway. In addition to this shift to a decentralized adoption model, SaaS use is accelerating at an alarming rate. Reuters reported earlier this year that ChatGPT, everyone's favorite copywriter, estimated to have reached over 100 million monthly active users only 2 months following its launch. I mean, that's pretty insane. So the point of that is whatever load or demand issue that you feel that you have as part of your application onboarding process, it will only get worse unless you change your approach to this. So what risk does the SaaS sprawl present? Well, I'd say the main risk is what I've stated previously. We're just not always applying the same level of security to security controls to these SaaS apps that we would for on-prem technology or critical infrastructure. Or maybe those security controls are only reserved for the most critical SaaS apps. We all know how that works out. Usually this means there is no security for SaaS apps. And this is as ridiculous of an approach as defense in depth. You see any faces wrinkle here? If you do think defense in depth works, it's likely you haven't run into ransomware before. That quickly erodes as a policy. Real quick though, most folks that are attacking these apps, they're usually looking to harvest tokens from cookies. That's usually their main game. We see this in a lot of attacks. Everyone should be familiar with token authentication. I'm sure there are lots of talks that are happening about that, but if you're not, it's a way of authenticating into an app using a one-time rando string that allows you to log in without using your credentials. But as a trade-off, as we interconnect more and more of these applications today, we're introducing tokens that are bypassing multi-factor authentication, because obviously computers don't have phones yet. They can't pull up their Duo and hit that for you. So anyway, we could do a whole day's talk on token auth, but we won't. Some of the attacks that we've seen this behavior in, we saw in 2021 Electronic Arts. Everyone familiar with that? They're a video game company. Hackers stole a bunch of their intellectual property. It's actually an in-development video game. Does anyone remember what it was? It was FIFA, I think. What a waste. But they stole this game and they were holding it ransom for $28 million. This attack was the result of stolen Slack cookies. They bought some for initial access from an online marketplace called Genesis. Then they used social engineering to get tokens from other employees in Slack. What they actually did is they used the initial token to authenticate into the workspace, logged into Slack, did what I would have done and contacted help desk and said, I lost my phone at a party last night. I really need to get in and finish this project, and played on their emotions, and guess what? They very quickly or supplied a token that would bypass multi-factor authentication. That allowed them to make their way into the production systems, download, like 700 gigs of data and hold that for ransom. And there are industries that are built on this concept. Specialized malware that scrapes your machine for cookies and extracts tokens. They're called info stealers. There are dedicated markets, like I mentioned, that only exist to buy and sell this compromised authentication. Anyone want to guess how much that initial access cookie cost the attackers that netted them the ability to demand the ransom? Anybody? $10. It cost the attackers $10 and a little bit of social engineering to accomplish this task. 2023 Circle CI breach. Everyone's familiar with Circle CI, continuous integration app. Malware was loaded onto a developer's machine via insert way here. They harvested cookies, which included a valid MFA-backed token, gave attackers access to their private code repo. But because they were authenticated as an engineer, that allowed them to create more access tokens, this time in their production environments, allowed them to move laterally into the customer environments and actually engage in some machine-to-machine compromise of these customers' GitHub repos. Obviously, like the worst case scenario. Slack actually had a breach earlier, I think last year, where they had, same method was used to attack them. They gained access to Slack, gained access to their private GitHub repos, but they actually had some segmentation in play that prevented this. Whether or not they got lucky, I think that's anyone's guess. So what do all these attacks have in common? Well, these attacks went largely unnoticed at first due to lack of visibility, control, awareness of what users were doing with their SaaS estate and how they were using it. And in several cases, these attacks were only made aware, or the vendors were only made aware of the breach because the attackers were demanding the ransom. So just evident of complete unawareness that this kind of stuff is even happening. Another inherent risk to SaaS sprawl that I mentioned previously is that since there are so many apps introduced these days, a lot of IT teams can't keep up, lose track, and then they just give up. Because let's be honest, most teams don't even try to keep up with the SaaS app adoption. It's not because they don't care, they're apathetic, it's because they think it's impossible, and at some point it starts to look like a waste of time. And as we all know, our projects that don't really net results, we kind of have to move on, and I've seen that happen a lot. There are also third and fourth party risks and issues, also called sub-processors. Most vendors these days are using third and fourth party tools to handle your data, provide a little extra value. We see that a lot in AI tooling. As vendors are adding AI functionality to their software, they're not clean rooming that. They're using OpenAPI or Bardeen or whatever that one's called, the Google one. So I would guess that if you're not able to keep up with the apps that are being introduced in your environment, I would hazard a guess that you're not able to keep up with what third-party applications those vendors are using to process your data. And we saw this. Example was the SurveyMonkey attack. I think that was in 2020. And let's just give a round of applause to Midjourney for just producing some amazing art for they can't hear you, it's fine. So the thing about SurveyMonkey, you don't have to be a SurveyMonkey user to get their surveys. It's important to understand. So what threat actors did is they compromised SurveyMonkey's app, their production environment, and sent phishing emails in the form of surveys. But these were unique surveys, so you had to re-authenticate with your credentials, you see. And these surveys came straight from surveymonkey.com, so these messages bypassed any kind of basic email filtering. Now, I know there are some slick, high-end email security suites that might be able to identify and correlate weird events and alert you to suspect messages coming from a known sender, but I've never used them. Most of the places I've worked either couldn't afford that type of technology, or we just had bigger fish to fry, rolling out MFA or SSO or EDR, KFC. So I can't really speak to the efficacy of those email tools. But for most folks, the only real way to thwart this type of behavior is quick detection and then quick dissemination to all your peers that this happened, so that you can get be on the lookout for emails coming from surveymonkey.com or whatever. And then, of course, continued education on your users of how to and how not to interact with any kind of message that's asking for information. But aren't we paying them? Like, why do we need to keep track of the technology a vendor uses? Isn't it their responsibility? Well, yeah, it is. But let's apply some practical sheen to this. Let's just imagine that you were involved in a breach of your single sign-on solution. That would never happen, right? Maybe it was a result of some sub-processors of theirs mishandling information. That was the last one. Legally, yeah, they're probably responsible for this, but what about the time between when the breach transpires and the time that you recover? Well, if you're lucky, you're able to recover quickly with minimal impact to your business, but you're still probably going to have some loss of productivity or revenue because you can't write new code or book new deals when you're under attack, right? You may lose some clients, but even for the clients that you don't lose, you possibly have eroded some trust there. But what if you're not able to recover quickly? What if you're a smaller or even mid-sized business? Statistically, SMBs that suffer a breach go out of business in the first 6 months after that breach. Why is that? Well, typically these larger organizations are able to weather a breach. They have larger teams, way larger budgets, probably able to cover way more ground than you can and resolve in a much more effective manner, a lot quicker too. They have cyber insurance. You may have cyber insurance as well, but chances are these large companies like one of the main SSO providers, they probably have relationships with these insurers. They might already have an incident response team on retainer that's on the insurer's list. So again, just a quicker time to value. They have marketing and PR dedicated to this type of activity. Did you know that? You may not think of marketing or PR as an important part of your incident response plan, but think about it. An effective, experienced marketing team will be able to produce a much more effective and palatable message to your users, letting them know in a responsible manner that this happens, but also kind of setting their fears at ease. And they have legal counsel. I mean, we all have lawyers too, but they have a whole team of them. They may be getting sued as well, but it's just not going to be as much of an interruption to their business as it might be to yours. So the point being is like, yeah, it's their fault, but it's your responsibility. You know, big or small, you have to understand who you're letting into your house. Vendors may not make this information easy to find, but it's there. In some cases, they may be required by law or regulatory compliance to disclose the sub-processors and the third-party tools that they're using to process your data. SaaS adoption, as we know it, it's not going away. You know, as I mentioned before, probably 3 or 4 times, these SaaS apps, this rate of adoption allows us to produce at the speed that we do today. And as, like I said before, it empowers your workforce, allows them to choose the technology that they feel is going to be the most useful. And we've already heard that people will go around you to get a job done, but what about folks that will leave companies if the technology use policy is too restrictive? I know someone recently passed up a really good job because they were using the other workspace suite that they didn't like, and there was zero flexibility. So the point is, you may lose good employees, you may turn employees away with this type of behavior. Who here uses a Mac for work? Windows? Okay, so mostly Windows still. Interesting. I've seen kind of a shift over the years, more Macs. Linux? There's always someone. No? Okay. Good, because that's like a super pain in the ass to add. And what would happen if your workplace all of a sudden made you switch? Would you care? Would you get frustrated? Would you consider leaving? It may seem like I'm on a tangent. Maybe I am. But the point I'm trying to make is that I think we need to embrace, within reason, the tools that your users choose to use, because I think it's our job to figure out how to adapt as this evolves. I cannot take credit for this. It was one of my favorite sayings. Security shouldn't be the department of no. It should be the department of how. Because what's our actual job? Anyone want to take a guess what the actual role of IT and security in a business is? It's to make money. I mean, outside of nonprofit organizations, but even then, they need to make sure that they're able to fund themselves. But regardless of what I or you think your job is, you are responsible for whatever issues arise due to the inability to keep up with this adoption. And just to remind folks, it is becoming more and more common that in addition to being the sacrificial lamb when losing their job when a breach occurs. These security leaders are getting sued more and more when a breach occurs due to suspected negligence, and in some cases could face legal repercussions for the breaches. Related, I think another risk are these shadow IT and risk transference myths and fallacies that people tell themselves to make them feel better. Like, I have my hands full with what I know about. I've heard that before. This is exactly what I was referring to when I said folks would say, well, we don't have an effective way to quantify this risk. That's not going to prevent a breach. That's not going to be a mitigating factor if your organization is found to have been negligent. There are a lot of myths around the shared responsibility security model that a lot of these SaaS apps employ. I mean, everyone's hopefully familiar with AWS. They've had a long history of navigating that one. But even Salesforce, everyone's familiar with Salesforce. Salesforce has a very easily misconfigured security setting that resulted in the leaks of a ton of private data. What it is you can give guest access to your docs repos, but if you flub the switch, you give guest access to all of your documentation. And this happened a lot. Brian Krebs, I'm sure everyone's familiar with him, he blew the lid off this recently, contacted a bunch of government agencies that he found leaking this data. And guess what? In fact, the majority of cases, they were quick to blame the vendor. One of the agencies even claimed, oh, well, that's not fair. This is right after the pandemic, and we had to stand up all these sites, and they couldn't go through our security process, and we didn't even have access to Salesforce developers. Can you imagine what Salesforce's stance was on this? It's not a vulnerability, it's a misconfiguration. It's your fault. And it's even more damning proof. They'd already published guidance on how to not do this. So there's a guide on how to set this up the right way. And the last one I've heard is like, if I put a policy out there and the user violates it, that's their problem? Really? I mean, you're never going to win here. Even if it is their problem, you're the one who has to clean up the mess. You're the one who has to change your policy to ensure that that never happens again. So the point of that is just a lot of lying to yourself that I've seen over the years that helps accrete some of this elevated risk, I suppose. This definitely is a tangent, sorry, but why or how does it feel like everyone is all of a sudden so comfortable with this unmanaged risk at the that SaaS sprawl creates at the executive or board level? And by comfortable, I mean they're willing to accept this risk. Before you tell me, oh, but Garrett, my company, we do care about SaaS risk, and it's one of our leading initiatives right now, I would say that you're in the minority. Most folks that I talk to all the time in executive leadership are either not aware of the issue, or that's what they tell me, or this unmanaged SaaS risk just isn't perceived as important as the other traditional security challenges and controls. When does it become important to them? When they get breached. So maybe this will help. I can share some of my personal horror stories, things that I've experienced in the field. I took a job not too long ago. Don't look it up because you'll figure out who it is. But the job was, you're walking into I don't want to say that. You're walking into a minefield. We have a lot of challenges with security. We have a lot of challenges with IT. Your job is to come in, do an assessment, fix it, and then move on. I had no idea what I was walking into. They had an application approval process that was unlike anything I'd ever seen in my life. So first and foremost, the spreadsheet, the star of the show here, it was the most unwieldy spreadsheet I've ever seen. It was like 1,000 rows. The columns went out to like 4 J's. I'd never seen anything like this before in my life. I'm not an Excel wizard, but I've been working with spreadsheets my entire career, so I don't think I'm bad at this, but I couldn't even use it. The length of approval was on average about 2 months. 2 months. And it was fraught with, just like chewing gum stuck on top, questions that just didn't really make sense, and a bunch of duplicative stuff. So not only was it a waste of time, but it was really frustrating. There was no application discovery. The only way that we found out about new applications was by, auditing finance or getting owned or something like that. They felt that this was acceptable. They felt that this was working well. The problem was no one else really shared that feeling. Everyone, like I said, was really frustrated by this, so they didn't do it. And it was very easy to just introduce applications and hide from it. So this was an entire person's job, in my opinion, in a macro level, was kind of a waste of time. AWS. So AWS was our main cloud environment. Rest assured, we had all of them, but AWS was the main flavor that we had. Thankfully, we were using an endpoint detection system that was able to report when one of these boxes was an AWS instance. It would give me an AWS account number as well. But the organization had undergone so much change over the year and acquired so many companies. Each one of them had, we'll just say 5 AWS accounts that came with them. And of course, no one thought to inventory these AWS environments, either in due diligence, which is what I would have preferred, or even as they were starting to coalesce the environments. There was just no concept of maybe we should write all this down. No. I also discovered an entire organization of shadow IT. This blew me away. The engineering team at this point that I walked in had lost all faith in IT. So they spun up a DevOps team. It was just a second IT team. They did DevOps work. Those guys were actually super, super high end. I don't want to besmirch their good name, but they were mostly doing IT things for engineering. And none of the infrastructure was under IT purview. None of the infrastructure was following securities policies. I mean, they had some security controls, but again, there was no unification. There was no common understanding of what this looked like. So I'd see these AWS accounts, and more often than not, I had no idea whose environment this was. One thing that compounded this problem is that in addition to the infrastructure not being merged, the engineering teams weren't acting as a single organization either, rather a group of individual factions. They even called themselves tribes, which would infer warfare among one another. So every time I'd get one of these alerts, I didn't recognize the AWS account, I'd have to message each one of these teams in individual Slack channels. How effective do you think I was at that? Not very. It was like shouting into the ether. I just imagined them all hiding in the corner laughing at me going, oh, you'll never find that one. I was able to find a solution and enumerate all my AWS accounts many, many months later. And I won't say how many, but it was way more than I thought. I'll just say that. Supply chain breaches. I don't know why I have that picture up there for reference. This company I was at was very, very engineering-led, which meant that engineering just did whatever the hell they wanted. But like most orgs, we over time discovered or were made aware of tools in our use that were, had some vulnerabilities that were discovered. But due to the fractured nature of this organization that I described earlier, there was no centralized understanding of what all was in use by engineering or anyone for that matter. So again, when these vulns came to light, I had to do the same thing as I did with the rogue cloud accounts. I had to message every single one of our dev teams. I think there was 19 or 20 saying, do you use X? Obviously, this took forever, was painful and frustrating for everyone involved, and it just left us exposed to attacks for an unreasonable amount of time. There are probably some juicy ones, but I should probably move on. I might get into litigation territory. Let's talk about some of the mitigation and risk reduction strategies for SaaS sprawl that I believe do not work. We talked about manual approval and this manual application intake. There's just way too many apps being introduced at one time at a very, very fast clip. It's just going to be impossible for you to manually intake and approve all these applications in an efficient manner. Network inspection, we talked about that. What is a network in 2023? I ask myself that a lot. The last gig I was at had a network engineering function. And I swear all they did was install Wi-Fi access points. Not dogging on them, just I was a network engineer back in the day and it was a completely different job. Most organizations don't even have a concept of a network when it comes to SaaS application use. Because again, like I said before, these machines are remote controls that just address applications on the web. But even if you wanted to somehow inspect that, what are you going to do? Like implement an always-on VPN and funnel all your web traffic through home office? I was on the security team for the producer of probably the biggest always-on VPN solution. I can tell you, nobody used it. I should be very clear in saying that no one in our org used it. I can't speak for the customers, but they probably didn't use it either. It was slow, clunky, irritated everyone. One of the features that was introduced, actually, this is great. You could pause the VPN for like up to 2 hours if the gateway was messed up. Because gateway would mess up every once in a while, and you'd have to pause it to do your job. But what do you think everyone did? They just paused it over and over again. So, CASB. Anyone here using a CASB? CASBs work really well, right? For the applications that you know about. It's the ones that you don't know about that are constantly owning us, though. So again, the CASB approach, not a bad approach, but probably want to complement it with some sort of discovery functionality. Then again, we talked about locking the environment down, not going to produce good results, so probably don't do it. What I do think works, and if you do want to get serious about understanding this technology that's in use in your organization, you need to start with discovery and visibility. You can't manage what you don't know about. You need to be continuously curating that information, though. And I know I dogged on spreadsheets earlier, but the problem wasn't actually the spreadsheet itself. In my personal opinion, you should move off of a spreadsheet as soon as possible. But the problem was, there was a very large effort initially in discovering and manually discovering and documenting all this application use, but then it just tapers off. The majority of folks that are doing this, they have a hard time curating the data because it is a lot of work. And as I said, sometimes it doesn't always produce tangible results and you kind of give up. There are solutions out there that will help you discover and document what was found. I do work for one of those companies, but I'm not here to sell you my product. I am absolutely here to sell you on our approach, though. There are other solutions out there that do it, so I think ours is the best, obviously, but regardless of how you do it, you need to discover the use of new applications as soon as users are signing up for these accounts. And again, various ways of doing this. Next up, you need to find a way to automate the process of gathering information about these applications. Okay? As discussed, doing this manually, you might have to do this at first, but that is not a viable long-term solution. You can create bots that'll go crawl the internet, get information about these applications, both from the vendor's own website and documentation, review sites, other sites. Comes in super handy when we were talking earlier about the sub-processors of your data. Very easy to retrieve that stuff with a bot. You can ask your users, again, kind of tedious and difficult to do this from a manual perspective, but if you get an automated message that goes out when the application is identified, asking them about it, why did you do this, what kind of data is handled, yada, yada. And you can actually harvest a lot of information about the application when it's provisioned through your IDP or through your single sign-on provider, especially when it comes to understanding what permissions are required to use that app. I know we didn't go into OAuth or anything. Again, that's probably its own talk. But most folks treat OAuth like a EULA these days. No one's reading it. Okay, no one's reading what they're agreeing to. And even for weirdos like me that do read them, it can be kind of cryptic. I could see one pop up and ask me for naming rights of my next child, and I'd be like, well, I don't understand this, but I really need to use Midjourney for my presentation. And I just want to reiterate, you need to continuously curate this information about your SaaS app estate, monitor for any changes that happen, because again, I've seen a lot of examples where folks start out strong in this journey, but then just get tired, bored, don't see the value. And of course, as soon as they let their guard down, that's when they get owned. So this actually needs to be someone's job. It can't be like, I forgot what it's called, like the 911 effect. Someone call 911. No, it needs to be like, Kate, call 911. So this task needs to be someone's job. It doesn't have to be the only thing that they do, but it needs to be like a known remit that they provide to the organization. And if it's a small team, automate that process. Very simple. I mean, there's tools out there today. You can, again, talking about AI, you can just tell ChatGPT to write a bunch of code, and sometimes it works. In summary, I just want to conclude with, this decentralized technology adoption where it's mostly SaaS apps. This is the new reality. The known way of managing this technology intake, it does not work in this new reality. And if you perceive that as a problem, that your old approaches are not working with this new reality, it's only going to get worse for you. So my advice, the only choice here is to adapt and evolve. Thanks so much for your time today. That's all I got. I'd love to entertain any questions. We can talk about SaaS sprawl, shadow IT, and move on to Star Trek: The Next Generation. Anybody? I always get in trouble when I do that, by the way, because someone in the crowd is like, were there 3 or were there 4 lights? No questions? Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.